Hey class, in this section I will look at the equilibrium in the aggregate demand aggregate supply model. I have the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve intersecting at an equilibrium price of 100 and an equilibrium quantity of 510. This is a short run equilibrium. We have short run equilibrium only when the aggregate demand is equal to or intersecting the short run aggregate supply curve. And this is also evident from this aggregate demand aggregate supply schedule. Now let's look at three other situations graphically. So here I have all three curves: the downward sloping aggregate demand curve, the upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve, and the vertical long run aggregate supply curve. The output associated with the long run aggregate supply curve is the full employment output level. Over here, the long run equilibrium is also equal to the short run equilibrium because all three curves are intersecting each other. Okay. Now let's see another situation here. Let's go to the next slide. Looks like here the aggregate demand curve and the short run aggregate supply curve. This is intersecting. I'm just going to put a name here too. So here the equilibrium or the short run equilibrium is to the left of the long run equilibrium output level. So Q1 is the short run equilibrium. This is because the aggregate demand curve is equal to the short run aggregate supply curve only at Q1 levels of output, and QF is the long run equilibrium output that is associated with the long run aggregate supply curve. So I just use some numbers here. QF, let's say the full employment output level is 100 and the actual output level, which is Q1, is equal to 80. Because the actual output, this is less than potential output, we have a recession, and the recessionary gap is QF minus Q1, that is 100 minus 80, which is 20. So just to let you know, a recession is accompanied by cyclical unemployment because the economy is producing less than what it should be. All right, the last case is this one, where we have the short run equilibrium to the right of the full employment equilibrium. So the actual output is greater than the potential output, and we have an expansionary gap which is Q1 minus QF. Just using some numbers here, 120 minus 100, this is equal to 20. This means the economy is producing more than the full employment level of output, and that is not really feasible for a long period of time. Okay, so we just learned about short run equilibrium where aggregate demand is intersecting the aggregate supply curve. The long run equilibrium is associated with the long run aggregate supply curve. We looked at three situations. First one, the long run output is equal to the short run output. Let's say that is Q1, and the long run output or the full employment output is QF. Then we looked at a recessionary situation where the short run output is less than the long run output. And after that, we looked at an expansionary situation where the actual output is greater than the full employment output. Hope all of this makes sense. Thank you very much.